This is ORAC.
100 million for that.
It is a brain, a genius. It has a mind that can draw information from every computer containing one of my cells. ORAC has access to the sum total of all the knowledge of all the known worlds.
But, where's the dice? Can it do this? Ooh. Sitting comfortably, seatbelts on. We're off on another adventure in Utopia. With me, David Brownell. This podcast is sponsored by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. No, really. Welcome to the Appetiser episode for Series 3 of Adventures in Utopia. Sorry, that audio clip was a bit random, wasn't it? But then, this is a mini episode about randomness after all. And curiously, the word random hasn't always meant the same thing. If we go back as far as the 1300s, we'll find the earliest evidence of it in the peasant's utopian poem, The Land of Cockaigne, where random meant something done very quickly and perhaps carelessly. You were most likely to presume that I was using the word random in its most recent slang form, which I was, implying that the audio clip at the beginning was a bit haphazard, a bit odd. Mostly, however, random is used to imply something done without method, purpose, or conscious decision, like throwing dice, as I did at the beginning, or shuffling a pack of cards so that the cards are dealt at random. As part of the research for this series, I interviewed James Bridle. Their book Ways of Being was one of the most inspiring and thought-provoking that I'd read in a long time. It explodes our limited and reductionist ideas and definitions around intelligence, a theme which we'll explore in another episode. But elsewhere in his book, James demonstrates how randomness has an integral part to play in politics, in art, in nature, and in evolution. There are even radically different types of computer systems now in which randomness via the natural world is a key element, and it could fundamentally change our relationship with the digital realm. Here's James.
In the 1940s, Alan Turing invented what we now consider to be the computer, to the point where computer scientists still call it a Turing machine. Turing's huge breakthrough was to realize that using that incredibly simple process, which he imagined as a mechanical machine and is now done just with electrons inside almost every single computer on Earth, could do almost every single mathematical calculation that we could imagine. And that was this incredibly powerful realization. And out of that, we got Turing's universal machine, the automatic machine, as he called it. And that Turing machine has become more complex over the years. It's the laptop you use, it's your phone, it's your washing machine, it's the ATM, it's the thing that flies planes, it's the thing that runs the stock market, it's all the machines on the internet. All of these things are Turing machines, what I call computational thinking within the framework of Turing's machines becomes the kind of dominant way of thinking about the world. Obviously, it came out of scientific thinking, it came out of mathematical disciplines, it came out of this very deliberately well-structured Western rational way of reading and writing and seeing the world. And it's solidified that worldview and become the most powerful way of thinking that we have, with many, many interesting benefits and strange things happening. But it is not the only way of thinking the world. They have made all these things possible while reducing the world to things that can be described in binary terms, in ones and zeros. And they effectively exclude things which don't fit so neatly into those categories in all kinds of ways. And that's kind of a whole bigger conversation. There's a very interesting thing that happens right at the beginning of Turing's writing, because Turing did a lot of interesting thinking about what he was doing. And in one of his, I think only the second paper he ever wrote, he said, of course, the automatic machine is only one way of doing calculations. He called it the automatic machine because you basically put in an instruction and then it goes chug, 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 chug through that mathematical calculation and outputs the result automatically. It only does whatever you put into it. He said, of course, another type of machine is possible, the Oracle machine. And I will not speak of that. And then he just sort of goes on, and we have the whole next 90 years of computation. Some people have done some thinking about the Oracle machine. And the Oracle machine is a machine that's connected to the world in some meaningful way, is one way of describing it. The automatic machine is only connected to the world at the point of its input and its output. It's a fixed system. It doesn't change. I mean, you can reprogram it, but once programmed, it just does the thing it's supposed to do. The Oracle machine doesn't do that. The Oracle machine waits at some point in the calculation to get some other information from the world. It's connected to the world in this interesting way. One of my favorite examples of actually existing Oracle machines, in one sense, is random number generators. There's a very interesting, weird property of mathematics, which is that it's incapable of making truly random things, right? Because you understand an automatic machine that only does what you tell it to do can't do anything random. Because even if you tell it to produce a random number, it's going to do it according to some fixed mathematical process, which you could figure out if you didn't tell it in the first place. Supposedly random numbers produced by machines are never actually random. They may be incredibly complicated and take like, a million billion years to figure out, but they are not actually random, and you can theoretically figure them out. And this is a problem because we need random numbers for certain things. We need them for things like lotteries, or we need them for things like encryption. Every time you use your credit card online, like random numbers are used to make that number hard to read. And so we've come up with a bunch of weird ways of doing that, most of which are mathematical and therefore ultimately breakable. But things like lotteries, for example, they often use truly random number generators. There's a famous thing in Britain, if you've ever played the premium bonds, which is just a lottery where you guess some numbers. The numbers for the premium bonds have been for decades developed by or produced by a series of machines called Ernie. But Ernies, brilliantly, were not Turing automatic machines. Ernies were Oracle machines because they reached outside of themselves in order to generate the numbers. They didn't just do maths in their own head. They asked the universe for the number. And they did that in various ways. For example, they would have, as part of the machine, there would be a neon tube, a tube filled with neon or another of the kind of noble gases. And they would measure the voltage fluctuations within that tube as they passed an electric current through it, because that voltage would change based on like atmospheric activity, the magnetosphere, cosmic rays passing through the Earth, things that no mathematical system could guess at or produce purely mathematically. True chance at the universe scale. So these machines, Ernies, they were Oracle machines because they didn't just do an automatic calculation. They asked the universe. Like they stopped at this point in the calculation, like Turing said, to ask a question of the universe. And so you have a computational system that is not limited to just a single box. That is not just a set of instructions inside a container, separate from the rest of the universe. You have, like with the horse and its trainer, a vastly larger connected, potentially intelligent system of different things operating upon each other that produces something that the boxed, narrow world of the automatic machine could never do. So the lesson for me of the Oracle machine is that really randomness is one of the ways we can start to think about and approach kind of breaking out beyond some of these very narrow reductionist lenses we have for understanding and thinking about the world. That randomness represents for me this sort of quality of strangeness, interesting weirdnesses that happen when you break out of kind of automated and reductive processes and see the world kind of anew, that you admit new possibilities that would not have been possible otherwise. There's huge amounts of fascinating research within kind of biological evolutionary sciences that are starting to put more emphasis, for example, on the role of randomness at different levels of evolution. We, have what most of us think in our heads these days is quite a good model of evolution. We're all quite good little Darwinists, and we all think that we understand, these kind of competing evolutionary pressures, and like this bird grew this way because this fruit was available, and we have this actually quite mechanistic view of how evolution occurred. And that's not really a surprise, of course, because Darwin himself was a scientist and had this quite mechanistic understanding of what he was describing so that he could draw it down as kind of graphs and trees and so on and so forth. And that has been filtered through the last 150 years of kind of scientific specialization that has also, and through a technological revolution, like I said, computational thinking imposed this kind of grid over everything that makes us think of it in these kind of quite boxed in ways. But actually, there's vast amounts of randomness occurring within evolutionary processes all the time, at kind of every level, both in the way that the genes split when reproduction occurs, all the way up to kind of radiation or strange substances in the food or whatever that might influence an organism. That life itself is much, much more random than this kind of reductive idea of evolution allows for.
In Ways of Being, James writes, natural selection may apply a limiting force, but only after others have done their work. Random processes precede natural selection. They are the foundations on which all evolutionary change is built. Back to James.
And so we can start to take some of those ideas and say, well, where interestingly can we apply randomness within our societies, within our own evolution, in order to make interesting things occur? This has been done at various points in various ways by various societies throughout human history. One of the most interesting ways is random processes within politics. And this has occurred at surprising points in both Western and non-Western histories. In ancient Greece, in ancient Athens, what we consider to be the birthplace of modern democracy, a lot of things that we would now look back and think were done by voting, they weren't. They were done by random selection. There was a big machine, essentially, that stood in the center of the agora in ancient Athens that assigned people positions within society as jurors, as government officials, as senators, based on a random selection, based on a lottery machine that pulled balls out of a box, right? And it was actually regarded as being foundational to democracy to have this quality of randomness, because what it did was it broke down existing hierarchies of power. Difficult to maintain within a society, but the ancient Greeks, who we like to think of as the kind of progenitors of democracy, they believed in random processes as a way of both ensuring the continuance of kind of popular power, preventing power, accruing to a few people, and also essentially to shake things up, to introduce new ideas into the system. This has other historical parallels. The Algonquin congresses, the big kind of parliaments of native peoples in North America, they use random processes as well. They're still used in many kind of town village assemblies in India, for example, I know about. So they've popped up kind of throughout history. And there's a real movement to kind of bring them back today. The most common name for where you see it occurring now is in these things that are called citizens' assemblies. And these are political assemblies which are put together to discuss issues of the day and advise governments. The most famous one in recent years that people might have heard of is the Citizens' Assembly in Ireland, which is still ongoing, which the Irish government formed to kind of advise on various things. And what they did was and this is an absolutely key part of the Citizens' Assembly, is that they selected 100 people at random from the entire population to participate in this political discussion and decision-making process. And this 100 people, completely taken at random from the population, were asked to consider a bunch of really highly contentious topics, including abortion law, including environmental law, end-of-life care, things like this. And it hasn't been an easy process by any means, but it has produced some really extraordinary results, including, of course, the referendum that eventually legalized abortion in Ireland after 75 years. And what's interesting about that process is they were capable of producing consensus from wildly divergent viewpoints. 100 random people put in a room came to agreements on these subjects through discussion. And they also produced results that were politically considered to be more advanced or more radical than politicians were prepared to suggest, right? Because politicians were scared of their voters, they were scared of saying stuff too powerful. People weren't. And when you put the people in the room together, they were capable of putting forward a more radical agenda for certain questions. So that's a really powerful mechanism that we should possibly look at some more. But it relies on something has been sort of hinted at or thought about within social sciences and kind of knowledge theories, that essentially when faced with very complex, novel problem, then the best, and by best, maybe we mean the most useful or the most achievable solutions, are not going to be produced by narrow groups of domain experts, people that we think are good at this thing. Because these problems are complex and they're new. Rather, you need to bring in as many different ways of thinking, as many different intelligences as possible in order to bear on this, that you randomly select from as many people as possible, rather than appointing the same old people who have experience of previous events that don't necessarily apply now. And that's where citizens' assemblies seem to be very powerful. And that seems to be where they draw a lot of their kind of strength from. But it's really a lesson, I think, to be applied much more broadly. Because if you're starting to think about, well, like multiple, this collaboration of multiple intelligences in broader systems seems to produce interesting results. And at the same time, we're starting to say, well, maybe this question of what or who is intelligence goes beyond the human into much more complex systems, non-human beings, the world itself. Well, then the thinking that we need to do to address our complex and novel problems in our own time, in our society, environmental relationships, and the state of the planet, then that too really must be the product of many, many different intelligences, human and non-human, coming together in some kind of new symbiosis.
I find it encouraging that we can use randomness to push through radical laws, and it got me imagining what 100 people in a citizens' assembly in my own country of the UK might decide on such topics as the rights of nature, our right to clean water and unpolluted soil, the end to cruel treatment of animals in laboratories and intensive farms, and better access to the large swathes of land and waterways that are owned by such a tiny percentage of people. In Ways of Being, James writes, "The use of randomness is to better approach the world as it actually is, not limited to the sciences." Artists like William Burroughs, Brian Eno and John Cage have all employed randomness through systems like the cut-up method or Eno's oblique strategies cards, relinquishing elements of control and allowing artistic expression to be opened up to the complex and chaotic forces of the universe to which we are entangled. The final thought. I love the idea that computers of the future would be open systems interacting with and through the world as divination machines. It got me thinking about our ancestors and indigenous cultures and the widespread practice of divination across the world through the likes of the I Ching, the Oracle of Delphi, tarot, astrology.
The Delphic oracle would answer questions truthfully without giving a true answer.
So what we need is not the right answer, but the right question.
Okay, here's a question. If we are divination creatures, what might that tell us about the nature of consciousness? That's all to come in Series 3. Adventures in Utopia was produced and presented by me, David Bramwell, with music from Oddfellows Casino. For more info, go to drbramwell.com or contact me on Twitter @drbramwell. Huge thanks to all of my guests in this episode and for the support of Hawkwood College. The idea of Newtopia was established by John and Yoko in 1973 as a place with no boundaries and whose international anthem is silence. Gratitude and support to our friends at Journey to Newtopia for their role in our provenance. This podcast is made possible by the generous sponsorship of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. Wait, Druids you say? Aren't they all just about wearing white robes, hanging around Stonehenge and listening to the Levellers? No. Isn't there human sacrifice? No, that was propaganda put about by Julius Caesar. But you have to have a beard and carry a staff, right? No. Are they passionate environmentalists with a love of storytelling and art, herbalism, divination, and with an added spiritual dimension and ritual practices that connect with the seasons, the elements, and nature? Yeah. That's what Druids are. Do they drink mead? Actually, yeah, they do drink quite a lot of mead. Find out more about what the Order does and offers on their website at druidry.org.